Well, I think we can make a start. My job here is just to say welcome, really, to everybody who's joined. We have about 70, 80 something people on the call at the moment. Hopefully this is going to be a useful session. It's going to be chaired by James, who knows the topic from INCA's point of view inside out. I think probably everybody else on the call has got a fair idea of what's happening are. So as I say, thank you. This is INCA's first webinar of the year. We'll be running a series of other webinars during the course of the first half of the year and our conference towards the end of the year, which we hope will be face-to-face if that's possible, if the pandemic has subsided and we've all got vaccinated by then. And as I say, thank you. If you aren't already familiar with INCA, then I'm sure you can have a look at the websites. And if you're not members of INCA, please do join. We welcome everybody into membership. And I'd like to hand over to Raj to say a few words on behalf of BDUK. Thank you very much for joining us, Raj. It's great.
Thanks, Malcolm and James and all the INCA team and all the members as well. So it's great to be here talking to you today. As you said, first one in January 2021. And so much has happened in the past 12 months for BDUK and I'm sure for the industry as well. Whilst it's been a pretty horrible 2020 for us all on many levels, we've made enormous progress in BDUK with you and with the rest of industry, trying to figure out and trying to scope out exactly how we're going to deliver our gigabit capable ambitions. And I'm going to start there and just talk a bit about that to start with. You'll all know that we have had allocated £5 billion to deliver gigabit capable broadband in the final 20%. Within that, we kind of carve out the final 1% and say we're going to think about that one more time and talk to the Treasury about that. So we're talking about the final 19%. But recently, you may think the ambition has changed. We did have a kind of 2025 100% coverage target, and we've restated that now after extensive engagement with the market, so that it's a floor, a minimum of 85% delivered by 2025. And in doing that, we obviously at the spending review talked to Treasury about line of sight that we had from industry for contracts and potential build, and that gave us an initial allocation from Treasury of 1.2 billion over this spending review period. So we've got 1.2 billion allocated of the 5 billion. The 5 billion is still there. Our ambition for 2025 is to do at least 85%. That's 80 percentage points of commercial build and 5 of the 20%, the final 20%. In actual fact, we think we can go further. We are talking to many of you already through the condoc that we sent out just prior to Christmas, so the consultation document. We've been talking to larger suppliers specifically as well throughout the whole of the market engagement and some of your members too. But we think 85% is genuinely something that we can go beyond, and our ambition is to do as much as possible of the 100% by 2025. So just to kind of give you a sense of, you know, whilst the target may have changed, the ambition definitely has not. We do want to do as much as possible, and we've spoken to Treasury about if we can provide them evidence that the market can go further and faster, then they will allocate the funding so that we can do so. So that's a really good thing, I think, from our point of view. But what I did just want to talk a bit about as well is over the past 12 months, BDUK has gone through quite a large transformation, and it's really gearing up to figure out how it can deliver in the final 20%. As I said, we released a consultation document in December. I'm hoping that all of your members will be responding to that consultation document and talking to us about what your plans are, where you want to build across the UK. We just put our best foot forward and said, here's what we think a first set of maps might look like, for want of a better expression. And we want to work with industry collaboratively to figure out what those first procurements might look like for the outside-in programme and the UK Gigabit programme as a whole, actually. So today we'll be talking to you about you know, how we're going to intervene in the final 20%, the final 19%, what that looks like for us is a kind of overarching program called the UK Gigabit program, hubs and vouchers, which are on the demand-led side underneath that, and then the superfast program and outside in, which are on the supply side underneath that. So 4 interventions that are all going to be delivering gigabit capable broadband, where we've come up with a kind of integrated strategy, if you like, to deliver across the UK, mixing those different interventions in different ways across the country so that we come up with local plans to deliver connectivity that mix those different interventions. That's our approach. I'm not going to go into too much detail about each of those, because that's exactly what the team's going to do post this. So it's a really exciting moment for us where, in the spring, we're going to be coming out and talking more about what that procurement looks like, having done this initial consultation with industry. We're very keen to make sure that we get as much done as quickly as possible. You may well see that we're leading more on demand-led in the short term whilst we ramp up the supply side of things, but we're definitely going to be procuring supply-side interventions outside in this year and starting from spring. Lara will talk to you about types A, B, and C, so how we're splitting up the kind of different procurement types, if you like, and then we'll go into more detail. Ben will talk to you a bit more about B and go into more detail about the specific areas that we're looking to cover off as well. So that's all I wanted to say initially, Malcolm, is just to thank you for allowing us to come and talk to you today, because it's a big part of what we need to do is to make sure that everybody understands what the plans are, to feed back to us so that we come up with a plan that works for the whole of industry. We're really keen that we really, really drive competition as well throughout this whole process. And we know your members, especially probably mostly in the kind of types A and B, are going to be very instrumental in trying to help us drive value for money and drive that competition into the whole procurement process as well. So I hope you learned a lot today, and we're here to answer as many questions as possible, as well as kind of paint the picture of what we're trying to do. And so on that score, I'll probably join the Q&A towards the end, Malcolm, if that's okay with you as well, just so that we get the most out of the session. But that's it from me. Back to you, Malcolm, and then on to the rest of the team.
Thank you very much, Raj. That's fantastic. James will be chairing this seminar. As Raj said, the consultation is out at the moment. We are encouraging all of our members to respond, and James is preparing an INCA-based response to the consultation as well. So hopefully you'll get a lot of responses coming in, and they are going to be helpful to the process and to sorting things out. Now I'd like to hand over to James, but James can explain how people can ask questions and get involved, a bit more involved. Thanks again to Raj, and thanks to all of the people who are participating in the seminar.
Okay, thank you, Malcolm. I'm going to make this very, very brief because we're almost on time, which is kind of nice. So I want to hand over to Laura as soon as I can. You'll see at the bottom of your screens there are 2 buttons, one Q&A and one chat. It's far easiest for us if you use the Q&A for any questions. Use the chat if something is going alarmingly wrong and you need to try and get to us, or just butt in. So with that said, over to Laura and for the start of the update from BDUK.
Thank you, James. I'm just going to try and share my screen. So fingers crossed. So as I was saying, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Laura Batistagola. I am the Commercial Deputy Director in BDUK, responsible for commercial strategy and support and management of all of the programmes under BDUK. So thanks, James. If you could just go to slide 3. Thank you. So as Raj mentioned, the UK Gigabit programme, it really is a sort of 4-pronged attack. Hopefully everybody's fully aware of all of this by now. But what I've done here is I've just sought to distinguish between the different areas under this programme, why we've done it this way, and who we're hoping to access in the market by doing it this way. So hopefully now everybody's familiar with the demand and supply sides. And as Raj mentioned, the latest announcements around the budget, I think did cause some confusion. So what I've done here is I've tried to show a kind of rough order of magnitude as to the amount of funding that we think is going to go through each of the different interventions. And I feel duty bound to draw your attention to the little footnote here, which says that this is subject to change and approvals. So please bear that in mind when you look at this information. We do have to still go through the formal approvals process with Treasury. So we won't be able to confirm this level of funding until we've done that. So please do bear that in mind when you're looking at this information. But we're sharing it with you now just because this is the most up to date information and view that we have. So on the demand side, well-rehearsed mechanisms that have been very successful to date, particularly the voucher scheme. And the good news is that there'll still be funding available for that scheme. We've seen a really great response from a very, very wide supplier base on the voucher scheme. So there's a really strong business case to keep a scheme going. It's got the lowest entry criteria of all of the interventions that we run. So it means that we can access a segment of the market which we can't reach with the other mechanisms. So yeah, it's got the fastest application process. There's the fewest barriers to entry for suppliers to join. And as Raj said, we want to front load the programme with vouchers and hubs so that we can get builds started whilst we do the sort of lengthier procurements that I'll come on to in a moment. And then on the hubs, I'm sort of doing this in order of ease to join. Hubs, we've got about 40 suppliers now on the CCS DPS agreement. So for those of you who aren't aware, that's the Crown Commercial Service Dynamic Purchasing System, different to the outside-in dynamic purchasing system. And we think about £150 million of funding over the full period, so not just up to 2025, and that goes for the vouchers funding as well. So this is over the full £5 billion. We think that's the proportion of funding that will go through the Hubs programme. Because it's a DPS framework, it's got a reasonably short call-off process. And again, easier to enter into because it doesn't have the wholesale access requirements that you would see under a subsidised scheme. So slightly less funding for the Hubs programme than the voucher scheme, but still a very effective mechanism accessing a segment of the market that wouldn't want to bid for the supply side mechanisms. And then just moving on to the supply side mechanism, super fast, hopefully everybody knows now. It's the sort of juggernaut of a programme in BDUK that's been delivering very successfully for many years. We've got about 90 million additional funding within the headroom of the state aid decision, which we would like to use strategically on some additional coverage change requests. There's obviously no defined timeline for that process, and it's really as fast as local authorities and ourselves can go. And it's in line with existing contracts, so no new contracts under the Superfast programme. And then finally on outside in, so this is our new programme, we expect the bulk of the funding of that £5 billion to go through this programme, but there is flexibility to move funding around between outside in hubs and vouchers if we need to, and if there's a strong business case to do so. We're hoping for between 5 and 10 suppliers on the programme, or more if we can. And obviously it depends on sort of the success of the market engagement to date. We're going to be using PCR. That's still required under the new subsidy control regime. So again, we think it's about a 9-month process from start to finish for each of the procurement routes, but then shorter once we have launched the DS for subsequent call-offs against that mechanism. Can you go to the next slide, please, James? Thank you. So just to reiterate what Raj touched on earlier, and hopefully you've heard this message from all of us before, why are we going for that multi-product approach? Well, essentially, there's we've got a big challenging target for ourselves, but also in the commercial build, 80%. So we need as much capacity and capability in the market as we can access. So each product will attract different suppliers. There are suppliers who will participate in the voucher scheme who will never consider a subsidised programme, and therefore we just want to make sure we're accessing everybody. And of course, every geographical area is unique and has its own challenges, and it means that a large rollout scheme won't necessarily quickly meet the connectivity needs of each area, because each area has got its own requirements. So we definitely recognise that one size doesn't fit all. Sorry, there's a typo in the slide there. Next slide, please. Thank you. So just really briefly on market engagement, I just wanted to show the partners that we work with here. So yeah, I've mentioned Crown Commercial Service, local authorities, devolved administrations and other government departments. We try to work as collaboratively as possible with all of our partners and try to give as many consistent messages to the market as possible. As you can see, that it's quite varied now, and for the first time, really, we'll be procuring for ourselves under outside in, which changes the dynamic again. So we've got existing routes to market and market engagement already with these programs, the legacy programs as well, so Superfast. But we plan with outside in to maintain the momentum that we've gathered over the last 18 months and continue to engage very regularly with the market. So probably a final point to make on this slide is that we've engaged very extensively on the DPS route to market for outside in. We're about to kick off the large contract and very large framework engagement as well. So that takes me nicely on to the next slide, please. So hopefully we would have read in the document that was issued in December that we are looking at different size contracts, and that is based on feedback from the market that we got over the summer whilst we were engaging on the DPS. So the DPS route still exists. We still want to use that. We think that that's sort of the everyman mechanism to use that's open to as many suppliers as possible. It's got the lowest entry criteria for financial standing, capability and capacity, which means that it should have the lowest barriers to entry. And it gives us the flexibility to bring areas in and out of scope over the life of the programme, depending on the feedback that we get from the market and review of existing build and new build and emerging suppliers. So that's still going to be one of our primary routes into spending money against the outside in programme. We're also bringing in something called large contracts. I appreciate these names are a bit strange, but it was through much conversation that we ended up with these. But they are for between 40 and 80,000 premises. So they will have appropriately higher entry criteria. We're going to use the restricted procedure for each contract. We don't think we can use the DPS as another lot for that, just because they're more complex requirements potentially. So they may include drawdown so that we can run OMRs in between build. And again, we'll keep an eye on the market and make sure that we are still procuring or drawing down premises that are eligible for funding. And then finally, there's the very large frameworks, and we're expecting maybe one or two of these to be required over the life of the programme. And this has got the highest entry criteria, as you can imagine. Again, the restricted procedure with a shorter time frame for each call-off. And what we're looking at initially is an area within the north with about 500,000 premises potentially in scope of the framework, and with call-offs of around 100,000 premises. But again, that depends on the data that you feed back to us over this period, and also further data analysis that our teams are doing. I've also just included in there a line about bringing premises in and out of scope of those frameworks. The intention is that to maintain flexibility over the lifetime of the framework, because we know that this is a very dynamic marketplace and that things are changing fairly rapidly as we move through the next few years. And then if we could just go to the last slide, please, in my section, James. I'll be very quick because I'm just looking at the time. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the pipeline. So obviously yourselves and other suppliers are involved in the outside-in pipelines at the moment, so feeding back information to us on the maps that we issued, and that will create the first version of the pipeline, which we'd like to issue in February or March. And then we're planning quarterly sessions after that. For the superfast remaining funding, we're working with local authorities and devolved administrations to find opportunities to further change request into existing contracts. And then on the hubs and vouchers, we have very strong pipelines already for each scheme. I won't read out the information that's there on the slide, but essentially we are looking at building on those existing pipelines and working very closely with the market going forward. So that is probably me over time, James. So I'll pass on to the next presenter.
Thanks, Lara. I think that's me. James, firstly, hello. You're the person I've meant to call back for about a month and we haven't spoken, so I'm sorry, but hello virtually. I'll try and keep this quite brief. Just quickly, this is slightly topsy-turvy actually. I'm going to talk about the large procurements first, which is possibly the kind of most significant new development, but I mean actually the right chronology really is to start with procurement type A, but I'll go on to this and we'll come back to the small procurements afterwards. So what we're trying to do with the large procurements is to hit a scale which is kind of interesting to investors. So we've been talking to a lot of the kind of mid-tier to large telecoms providers, so lots of you guys, about what sort of size is interesting and what sort of size gives us pace. And within that, how we can sort of provide a balanced diet, because our priority is still to hit the sub-super fast premises first, but we also need to move fast. So both bits. So we've ended up with some areas which are sort of closer to urban areas, because those tend to be the areas where organisations have built out the network, and this is a way of extending that network out at pace. We've found there's, not surprisingly, a regional focus for many of you. And also we've been looking, you know, we've kind of turned this around with these areas. These are driven entirely by what we've heard from you rather than what the local bodies have said. So actually natural implementation areas quite often span county boundaries, which has been quite an interesting sell for us back into local bodies. One thing to say just quickly, it's interesting actually. I think outside in gets misrepresented all the time. We're not saying that we start with the cafe at the top of Snowdon and we work back in. What we're saying is we start with the final 20, which is the outside 20%. And actually what we're hitting with these larger procurements hopefully is an ability to build at scale out from where commercial deployments will finish. We actually think that's a way of hitting the most sub-superfast premises quickly anyway, because whilst yes, there are little isolated communities who are crying out for even basic broadband, and those are an absolute priority, there are also some communities nearer into commercial build, where there's potentially really quite large areas with direct buried cables or whatever, where they also haven't got it. So we're looking at we're looking with the large procurements at a way of covering big areas, extend out from the large providers' networks, hit as many sub-superfast as possible, and get some pace into procurement. These are the areas which you've seen in the consultation document. I don't propose talking about these too much, other than to say these are not areas which have come from local bodies. These are derived from our conversations with a number of INCA members. So this is our view of where we think, if we were to go out to procurement, there's the greatest chance of a proper competition for each of these areas. It's not saying that we think that you know, the area around Durham is more important than Cumbria. You know, politically it may be exactly the opposite, I don't know. But what we've heard is that there's more market interest in building on the east than there is in the west. So we're trying to reflect that back here. We have cut it off in Wales slightly, but actually it was only pruning off little bits, and there were some areas in Scotland as well, which we'll be discussing with Scottish governments. So there's, you know, this is an England only view. We're talking to the other administrations now about how we join it together. So what we've done is we've hopefully listened. This is maximising prospects of competitive procurement and locations based on the feedback. So one final thing I wanted to say is these maps exclude sort of out of scope areas, if you like. So there's a table in the back of the consultation document which sets out a number of criteria for where we've deprioritized or descoped exchange areas. And I think it's worth saying that's a very crude approximation. So this is just our view based on modelling, based on Ofcom data, based on the information we've had back from vouchers, Superfast and other deployments. We really need data from you, and we're also working with local bodies because, you know, it's our best guess. I don't think anyone would say that our modelling is perfect to premises level. We think it's pretty good to exchange area level, but even then, you know, there's winners and losers. So we really need proper, accurate data about commercial build plans, not just in the immediate short term, but longer term, so that we can target things, target the deployments properly, and make sure we're doing what we're trying to do, which is support all providers to build out as fast as possible by extending what they're doing anyway. So yeah, so I mean, this is a map just to show you of, you know, the areas we've excluded, and I think it would be naive to expect that every single premises in all of those grey areas is going to be covered. We expect that we're going to be going to some of those areas in due course, and that's the sort of thing we want to refine through the OMR data. Now, I'm not sure, would you like me to pause there, or would you like me just to carry on with the very large procurements?
That's a very good question. We're trying to sort of catch up a little bit on time already. I think just a very quick overview of the very large procurements. We are getting a few questions in about those anyway, so we'll kind of touch on those and come back to them.
Okay, so very quickly then. I mean, you'll have seen from that map, we've got the areas where we think we go commercially. We've got the areas where we think there's a competitive environment, which we're looking to target our procurements at. But there's a whole pile of other premises where we think competition is less likely. Now, what we're really keen to do is to work with all providers to look at whether there are innovative solutions. So we're talking to a number of smaller providers with a very different ethos of covering, you know, 100% of premises and doing deals with farmers and whatever else, which we think will cover off certainly an area within the big procurement areas and the bit which is excluded. But we still think there's a need for a third type of contract, which is essentially an area-based contract, regional contract. Which, I mean, if I give you an idea, that's the sort of size we're looking at if we go to 500,000 premises, so it's a big one. So it's an almost, you know, we try type A, and we aim to get
approximately half the attendees have just stopped breathing, just momentarily.
Yeah. So yeah, so I mean, I think it's important to show this and explain what we're doing here. Now, this is a different layer on the map. This is just like, this is a kind of background layer. Our job is to draw on top of that layer whatever we can, so that we can guarantee that all bits of the UK are covered. So if we get, you know, in response to the consultation and the discussions that follow, if we can cover that map with competitive procurement areas, that's great. Our expectation is we'll only cover a percentage of that map with competitive procurement areas, because, you know, with the capacity that's available, there is probably only a percentage which can be done. And the question then is, well, if you're not in one of those competitive procurement areas, what's the solution? And this is where we think we need this kind of fallback contract, which we think will build a lot, but provide something which is available everywhere. But this is not saying, you know, I mean, you'll see on this map, there are all the areas which we've shown as potential type A and type B procurement areas. And, you know, clearly we're not saying this supersedes all of that. What we're saying is there may be areas within within the north of England, where it isn't obviously a type A or type B procurement area. It's not obviously a commercial area, in which case we need to be doing something. So that's, I mean, I probably don't really need to go through the timescales and next steps. The key thing is we need your input as quickly as possible. And maybe that's a good point to pause and take some questions. So I'm going to stop sharing so that I can see the screen, if that's okay.
Okay, Ben, does that cover? We had also Tony Meacham and Andy Carter sort of slated for sort of presenting on this. Does that cover that whole sort of presentation, or is there more to come from BDUK?
Well, we've got some stuff on small bundles and vouchers which we can go through, which I think Tony was going to talk to.
That's after the break. So, but this is all we've got on large procurement bundles, is it?
Yeah.
Excellent. Right. In that case, we now got some operator opinions on this. Now, I've made an executive decision on this because originally we had just Catherine Collins from OpenReach and Alex Blowers from City Fibre. Welcome both. But how can I put this? The market gossip was that basically that was just putting the operator feedback in terms of the fan club of the large procurement bundles, and I thought we needed a slightly different approach to that. So I've asked Lloyd Felton from County Broadband if he will also participate in this to give a slightly sort of a potentially counter view. Good afternoon, Lloyd. So what I propose to do is if we give each of them, and on my screen, the order goes Catherine, Alex, Lloyd. So we'll take that as being the one we use. If you can just give your views on that, and then we'll open this up to the Q&A specific to the large bundles. Does that sound okay? Go, Catherine.
Yep. Great, thanks. Lovely to see you all. Thanks, James, and thanks to Laura and Ben for walking that through. Let me just kind of give you a sort of few thoughts from us on where we are. I mean, just the kind of context, which might just be helpful, is our build program is still obviously progressing very rapidly. We have, while had a lot of challenges through the pandemic, we've managed to continue the scale of build through the pandemic. Actually, we were quite surprised about that. Still have the same old issues about MDU and other access. But we're on track to reach the 4.5 million. We're on track then to ramp to get to the 20 million by the mid-2020s. And that includes our 3.2 million commercial build in Area 3 that we've talked about. So in terms of what's been presented here, look, firstly, I think it's really positive to see these details. I know that a lot of us on this call and a lot of the BDUK team have worked incredibly hard for a very long time to try and get this up and running. I think it's really good to see that we're now making really concrete progress because we don't have a lot of time. Even an 85% floor, quite frankly, we need to start procuring immediately. So it's great to have all the detail. I think as OpenReach, we've also always been very clear, both with government, but also with all of you as industry, that delivering the final 20% is going to require collaborative effort across all of us. You know, there is no way that we can do this scale of work at the kind of pace that we're looking at unless we have lots and lots of operators working. And I see there's one comment, I think David sort of said 5 to 10 operators for outside in potentially feels too small. I think that's probably right. If you think about the sizes of different lots, I think it'll be hopefully a lot more operators and builders than that will get involved. And I think we need that if we're going to get there. It's much too big and complex a job for one operator. Believe me, OpenReach is not here putting its hand up saying we're going to be able to do all of it in the timescales, especially with our commercial build. So I'm really pleased that we've got, and the BDUK have put forward a tiered approach with different scales of different opportunities for different scales of player. I think also, you know, just if we go back to the large lots, I think the large lots are sensible in terms of sort of scale. You know, one of the things we talked about at the beginning was don't have thousands and thousands of lots. You need things of sufficient scale to be of economic interest for large scale players, but also potentially brings in smaller ones. So, you know, we think the large lots, while we're still reviewing them, are sensible. We also absolutely always advocated that this should be built on the basis of where we are all commercially building at the moment. So this kind of idea of following the build and following the supply chain and following the skills that we got in a particular location, it is much easier, as we all know, for all of us to build a bit extra and to sort of top up outside the tougher 20% bits of somewhere we're already building. So we're really pleased with this kind of principle of how you leverage the commercial build, as that's the only way I think we're going to be able to deliver any of this stuff at scale. We think the proposed boundaries of the lots look generally, you know, to be sensible. That we've sort of done a little bit of thinking, and it looks like it is largely in the 20%. We're again really keen to ensure that we're not using taxpayers' money to build in places that we would all of operators have built anyway. There might still be, as you say, a little bit of commercial build that needs to be de-scoped. We're sharing all that information with BDUK, and there is obviously a broader issue here around transparency. We publish our data 2 years out, 3 years out, if you look at the 3.2 million, and are very supportive of the sort of transparency agenda to try and ensure the taxpayers' money is put to the right 20% and doesn't subsidise commercial build. Scotland and Wales, obviously missing has been mentioned, but I do think sort of next iterations we need to look at those. We are encouraged by the reference to very large lots being developed. I think, you know, these sort of smaller pockets are attractive to a range of different operators, but quite frankly, if we're going to get anywhere near to 85% or 100% sort of soon after 2025, which I think we all believe is pretty fundamental and critical now as a sort of post-COVID combination of COVID recovery, then I think we need to crack on. So we're interested in how those lots will be developed and think it's really important as part of the package, but obviously need to see the proposals first to give a view. Like the fact that there's this combination of ways of approaching the market. So, you know, the vouchers I think have been hugely successful. We've connected over 140,000 premises sort of using vouchers and in combination with CFP. So I think that is good. Do you think sort of when you get down to the details, some of the terms and conditions, we still think are problematic? So, you know, we're obviously in conversation with these, but it still needs to be attractive. It can't be too onerous. We've obviously got to get the balance right around value for money, but we still think some of those terms and conditions just put too much risk on the investor and on the operator, and so think we need to work through some of those. And I think the last thing is, you know, we all think we can go further and faster. So as sort of Raj said at the beginning, this is a flaw, but I think ideally as an industry, what we want to ensure is we can unlock more of that money more rapidly. So that kind of slide that Laura sort of showed with all the money and how it comes across, we obviously want to be able to draw down more of that quicker. So I think an understanding of how we can do that and how we can work with BDUK and DCMS to persuade Treasury so we can access more of those funds more rapidly for us is also really critical. You're on mute, James.
Still on mute, still doing it. Thank you very much, Catherine. Alex, over to you.
Thanks, James. Can you hear me? I'm just making sure I've got the technology functioning.
Functioning fine.
So I'm still reeling slightly with the idea that I might be in the fan club for anything, actually, because as I think everybody's aware, I spend most of my life as a professional irritant, finding things to criticise and critique in what the government does and what Ofcom does.
Whining and dining, I think, was
exactly, yeah, whining to the regulator and dining out with politicians. That's my job. So what I would say, though, and I think this is kind of, from my perspective, is it's important to give credit where credit's due. And we've had a lot of really high quality engagement with the BDUK team over the course of the last, however long it is now, 12 months, 18 months. And I genuinely think where we're landing in the programme is a pretty good place. There's a lot to get right, and there's a lot of risk around the execution of the programme, which I'm sure the team is well aware of. But overall, this feels to me like a programme that is actually quite subtly designed to give real opportunities to participate for a whole variety of different operators, including those of us with the word city in our company's name. So the key insight for us to engage with BDUK was that the initial insight into where the problematic areas that might not be covered were in the country, actually quite a lot of that is not as remote and rural as one might perhaps have anticipated before we started getting into some quite detailed mapping. So I think the approach of finding a way to dovetail the outside-in programme with commercial builds, to have a kind of variable geometry on the design to allow different companies with a different business and commercial orientation to participate, all of this seems to me to be deeply sensible. Obviously, we don't want to see public money spent in areas that the operators will build, but there is a kind of complex interrelationship between certainly our commercial plans and how this programme would roll out. And one of the things that we've been keen to emphasise is that if you get the design of the programme right, it will actually expand the footprint of our commercial build as well. So it isn't simply about infilling stuff against some, as it were, static view of the commercial plan. Actually, the two things are interlinked. So all of this is good. Now, just very briefly, let me just kind of circle back around on some of the execution risk points. I actually feel quite liberated by the fact that I don't now have to attend these kind of calls and say, yeah, 2025 is doable and we're all up for it. Because, I kind of felt for a long time that it was important to be seen to be quite gung-ho on the issue of whether it's, 100% coverage by 2025 was doable. I've always had serious doubts about that, not least because I think we all know that there will be significant supply side resource constraints. And those inevitably, even with the most, brilliantly designed outside-in intervention, there's going to be a crunch point where actually the resources available to us as an industry, particularly in terms of warm bodies, is going to be a constraint on how fast we can collectively go. So I think it's a lot better actually to have a more realistic view of how much can be done by 2025, and 85% by 2025 is still a stretch target in my view. But I still think, that bucket of things that we broadly describe as barrier busting, the biggest barrier that we can see right now is mobilisation of enough warm bodies to actually get all of this stuff done. So that remains very high up on my list of issues to continue to be a bit awkward and irritating with the government about. Looking at the history of these kind of interventions, another risk is, and this is particularly because of the way that this programme and the contracts within the programme are structured, is actually landowners and landlords just refusing to engage and allow us to actually build. And that's particularly going to be a feature in rural. Again, I draw some comfort from the fact that DCMS on the policy side is now initiating a conversation about how we can actually make that side of things, the way leaves, the access to land, the electronic communications code work better. Because otherwise I can see some really quite perverse situations where actually, a handful of holdouts in an intervention area are effectively stopping us from completing building an intervention area. And that's quite significant because we don't get paid until we've actually handed over the last intervention property. And finally, I would just say that I continue to be somewhat surprised, and I know this is not a view that's unique to City Fibre, that Ofcom is less engaged and working actively. Maybe it's all happening behind the scenes, but I don't see any evidence of it. I'd like Ofcom to be much more actively engaged in this programme and in working with the government on a kind of combined rural strategy. And I think particularly important here, many of you have heard me witter on over the years about overbuild not being a great idea if you're actually trying to hit some really challenging geographic coverage target. Overbuild in these areas is just totally nuts in my view. And the only way that we can avoid that, either accidentally or on purpose, is by having some kind of transparency mechanism, which is more than just the voluntary transparency which our friends at Openreach have put into place. We know that there's a process to implement that transparency. We know that the levers to control that are in the hands of Ofcom. They've got the responsibility for implementing the necessary legal powers. That, for me, should be happening now at speed and in parallel with the development of this programme. And I think that's only one of several touch points where actually Ofcom be more involved and engaged and actually actively helping DCMS, being a supportive pillar of this programme, is super important. I could say much more, but I'll leave it there.
I know you can. Indeed. Thank you, Alex. Lloyd.
Thanks, James. When you asked me this morning whether I would hop from the from this afternoon session to this session, I was quite pleased to do so, because I think, generally speaking, the engagement we've had from BDUK this time around has been way above and beyond anything we've experienced before, both directly with some of the smaller companies and also through INCA as well. And I think we're generally thinking this smaller procurement idea is going to be great. It's going to be great. But the minute that the 26 larger procurement zones was published, I think we all looked at each other and thought, oh, so what does this mean then? Because the concern is always that these larger areas are going to blot out what we as I'm happy to use the word smaller companies compared to, Openreach, etc. Of course we are. Smaller companies are looking to achieve ourselves. And I think what needs better definition for us is the understanding that this is not a gap-funded program in the way that it used to be published. When we looked at these zones before, it was that whole area was going to be incentivized or funded. Whereas now, of course, what we're looking at is, well, that's the whole area where there is believed to be a commercial interest, and only one of those companies is going to be funded to go that little bit further. So that is an interesting dynamic. And if those areas are too large, then by definition, it rules out all of those up and coming companies, of which collectively we contribute quite a lot of billions to the investment in the UK, that would otherwise play a very active and commercial and competitive role in those spaces, many of which that have been included in the larger areas. Now, so far, the engagement we've had with BDUK suggests, and it's been confirmed again today, that as long as we're responding, as long as we're coming back with credible and reasonable assumptions about what we're both building and planning to build, and even to some degree long-term hoping to build with the de-scoping option that gets added onto the end of some of these large contracts, that can be accommodated and hopefully will be accommodated. So I'm very interested to see what the next iteration of these maps actually is going to look like. And coming back to Alex's point, absolutely, we don't want to overbuild. None of us want to be overbuilding. And for that to work, there has to be an acceptance that we will be sharing delivery across each other's networks. And for that to happen, there needs to be considerable progress made in the wholesale market. And something that INCA is trying to do, but something that that not only the operators, but also the content providers and ISPs that consume and use the networks need to recognise and come on board with.
Okay, Lloyd, thank you very much. We've got a few questions that are specific to the large voucher scheme. So, Ben, are you still there? Hoping you are. Yes,
I am.
There you are.
Sorry, I managed to swipe off the browser and turn my video off. So yes, I am still here.
One interesting one is, how will the voucher scheme interact with large procurements? And I think this interaction between the different sort of approaches is one that's obviously of interest to everybody. So any thoughts?
Yeah, so I think this is super important because actually talking to a number of suppliers, the business model is better suited to vouchers than to supply side intervention. You know, you're much more able to build incrementally, consolidate demand, and then possibly backfill with fibre and then build out a bit further. So that seems like a really good way of safely building a network in some areas. What we've been discussing internally is how to represent that, because the OMR is quite a stark statement. It's saying, you know, do you have firm substantiated plans to deliver commercially in these specific premises in the next 3 years? And particularly with vouchers, I mean, you can't honestly say yes you do unless you've got the vouchers, because they're not the provider's vouchers, they're the consumer's vouchers, and the consumer decides where to use them. I think the same is also true, and I mean, Lloyd, we've been discussing recently, you know, there are firm commercial build plans, and then there are some more speculative longer term ones and some ambitions and things like that, which again will have varying degrees of weighting. And I think what we need to do when we're coming up with these procurement bundles, given that it does black out a big bit of the country when we go with one of the large or the very large ones, is not just to take a view on the black and white bit of OMR or not OMR, but also it may not be OMR, but actually we may believe that there is a realistic prospect that it will become commercial. And we want to, you know, the last thing that we want to do clearly is to dampen commercial investment, because that means we're putting deadweight subsidy into areas that otherwise we wouldn't have had to. So we're really keen to stimulate providers doing their own thing. What we want to try and do is work out where realistically the outer expanse of that development is, and then run a competition with all of the companies that are able to compete to extend out from that outer reach to move further with the subsidy. So I mean, there isn't a perfect answer for this at the moment. The consultation is kind of the best we've got. I know, you know, Ryan and colleagues have a pipeline for vouchers. What we're looking at is how we bring that, plus also some of the sort of prospect list commercial deployments, which may be at a slightly higher level than premises level, and the OMR data together, so that we can decide where to go first. The other thing I was just going to say just very quickly is, whilst we may be confident we want to go to an area, actually, and this is a conversation we're having with local bodies as well, if there's lots and lots of commercial activity going, we're not going to be able to realistically run procurements simultaneously across the whole country. So it may be what we say is, actually, let's defer doing something there for a year and then look again and see how commercial plans have moved on, and then decide whether to go. And, you know, again, Lloyd and we had a discussion, we've had some discussions with local bodies on some specifics, and actually that's quite likely to be what happens, that we defer an area, because actually there's lots going on. So let's wait for that to play out a bit, and then let's look again and work out how we can work together to extend.
Okay, we need to be careful with that one, because I can see an immediate conflict with the deferring for a year, which sounds perfectly sensible and fair, and getting everything done as quickly as possible, in which case deferring becomes a problem. We've got another question, which in a sense I want to, I think, almost position to all of the operators as well as to you, Ben. So are large procurements the preferred process for BDUK, i.e. if an operator suggests a smaller intervention rather than a single bid, which would get put forward? And that's an interesting point. So if the smaller operators and regional operators just sort of start saying, well, okay, we've already got commercial build in this area, we want to create an area around that and remove that from the large procurement area, does that work? And at what point does that whittling away of the large procurement areas start to make OpenReach and City Fibre and others think, do you know what? It's not really a large procurement area anymore. How do we balance those? Who wants to go first? Catherine's not looking enthusiastic, I have to admit. Ben, over to you for a while.
Well, we need to, I mean, the first thing is we need to see what comes back from the consultation, and I think there is going to have to be, and this is for those of you that I've spoken to one-to-one, we have to be real about the fact that in order to make even the 85% floor, we need all providers to be working absolutely as fast as they can. We need to get every single spade in the ground. So, and that means that for the likes of Openreach, they will need to be working at scale in areas. And we also want to stimulate all the way down so that the smaller providers are able to grow and build on the deployments which they put in already, consolidate vouchers, whatever else. But I mean, the reality with that is we're going to have to draw some boundaries. So it may be that there's a small provider who feels that actually they could grow, they've got an aspiration to grow to a big area, but they're several steps away from that. We're going to have to take a view about, well, actually, how realistic is that in light of the 85% target? I think we're going to have to make some hard choices. But clearly, if there's someone that's has been building a network successfully, we can see that there's track record of building that network, that the consumers are happy and the local body is supportive and things, and the next logical step is to go out a bit further. That's exactly the point of this consultation, and we will carve those areas out of the large procurement areas. And we've also got the very large procurement area. So the large procurements and the small procurements get taken out of that as well. But there's going to have to be a bit of give and take. It's not going to be possible, I suspect, at a national level to keep everyone happy all the time. What we can attempt to do is to make sure that everyone is building as much as they can realistically. Okay, thank you, Catherine. Views on that. So if we start whittling away the large procurement areas, to what point do they then not become so attractive? There is another issue that I'd like your views on, that, and that is how quickly can the gaps be announced in the larger contracts, as the larger providers are unlikely to deliver 100%. And it's that last bit that I'd like your views on. So if Openreach is awarded one of the larger procurement areas, just what level of delivery and what level of coverage would you be able to provide in that area?
So let me kind of take both. I mean, I think that the first sort of answer is not a very helpful one, which is just that I don't think we quite know all of this yet, because we haven't seen a detail genuinely, unless we kind of understand how the process is going to work and how things are kind of carved in and out. It's a bit difficult to kind of give real specifics. Just from an overarching point of view, for us as Openreach, we're interested in scale. So, we really wanted large lots. And so we're really encouraged to hear that there will be some extra, whatever they're called, very large. I was about to say super large, but if I use super, it'd probably confuse everyone with these. But, the idea of very large lots works for us, because if we're going to lean into this and try and do quite a large amount of the 5 million, we're not going to do all of it at all, but a large amount, we need economies of scale and we need certainty over investment. So the kind of 500,000 prem number, which I think Lara and Ben were talking about, that gives us a degree of certainty that would mean that we could definitely engage in that. Now it then just comes down to what is in scope and what is out of scope. But if there's an overarching number which makes sense for us commercially, then we'll sign up to something with the overarching number. Now, the area might then have places in it that you don't build to in exactly the same way that a superfast contract does now, because either you've got commercial build or something else in. So, I would imagine it being similar in the sense that there's network that exists there already. It's not in scope, and so therefore you just work around it. Now, obviously, we have to ensure that it's not so patchy that those economies of scale and the economies of supply chain still work. But I think we can hopefully work through that with BDUK and make that possible. In terms of delivery, we would expect to deliver to the premises that are, put into the procurement. As to the would you deliver 100% in an area? I mean, we don't at the moment, because it's not commercial to deliver 100% in an area. But if it's subsidised, then obviously we will deliver the premises that are in contract. I do think there is, sort of related to that, though, there is a question which I'm not going to get into in detail now, because I think Alex and I will be here for hours, but about what is a sensible use of funding, and should you be building full fibre in all of that final 20%, and should you be using fixed wireless and other solutions for the final, I don't know how many percent that would be, but the final bits at the edge, which you know are prohibitive. So I think that there are ways you can then look at trying to get to close to 100% deployment, but I think that needs to come with looking at the intervention area and seeing what is commercially viable and looking at some other technologies as well that might come in at either end.
Okay, thank you very much. Alex, views on the same? So to what point do large procurement areas not get large anymore, and what about the 100%?
Well, I think I'm going to answer the first of those in a sort of slightly Delphic way, which is just to say, you know, our preference is not to overbuild other altnets. So I think you know, we, to the extent that we participate in this program, we'd be looking to participate in areas where we can meaningfully be the challenger altnet. I think part of the problem though is, you know, inadvertently treading on each other's toes simply because we don't have the maps and the granularity. So that takes me back to my kind of transparency point. But you know, I think there's plenty of problem to share out. Let me put it that way. So I don't see that I don't see that we should end up in a situation where, you know, we are somehow as altnets kind of cutting each other's route to market off through this process. And I think, you know, what Ben and colleagues have described as the information and evidence gathering from here should get us a long way towards that, you know, that necessary baseline of information. So I'm feeling reasonably comfortable with that. I'm really just going to say probably similar things to Catherine in terms of the, you know, we have had this debate about, is it 100% of the 20%, shall we say? Is that actually realistic given what we know and the government knows, because it did quite a lot of work on this in the past, about the way that the cost curve really just starts to totally climb to ridiculous levels as you get right out to the 98th and 99th percentile. I don't know the answer to this, but all my instincts are telling me there will be some properties that either have to be taken out of scope or for which we have to find solutions like point-to-point fixed wireless. Because I just think that you can burn through an awful lot of the money that's been made available if you're actually connecting up properties at 25 grand a pop.
Indeed, yes, that is always the problem. Lloyd, have you anything to say that will keep us from going to a refreshment break? No? Okay. Thank you very much. You will get a chance for a bit more of a Q&A, but I know that Catherine has to go, so I wanted to get some of that associated with the large procurement areas in now. Right, okay. So we now need to move on to look at, sorry, I'm just trying to find an agenda here so I know what's going on. Look at the small bundles and vouchers. So we've got Adam Lowes and Andy Carter. Now, I'm not sure what order you're doing these in. Adam, Andy, someone talk to me.
Yeah, hi, it's Tony. Tony here, James.
Tony, hi.
Hi, sorry. Yes, yeah, you got me instead of Andy to start with. Although I think Andy's going to join for the Q&A part. Okay. So I'm going to start off and just very briefly talk about small bundles. And then I'm going to hand over to my colleague Adam, who will then present briefly on vouchers, and then we can take any questions. I'll see if I can pass the technology test.
Looking promising. Yeah, you pass.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Okay, so. Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. For those that don't know me, I'm working in Matt Agar's team, along with Ben and others, looking at the delivery strategy. I'm going to talk today, as I say, just briefly about the small bundles. I suspect that for a lot of people on the call today, this is probably the procurement type that you're most interested in. So. I'm going to try and keep it relatively brief and give you an opportunity to to ask any questions that you might have about these types of procurements. As Ben had already said, we've done a lot of talking to the market. Clearly, there's still plenty to do, and there will be as the programme progresses. We've also been talking quite extensively to local bodies as well. But at a very high level, this is kind of the market view on what we're being told. So, in terms of the number of premises for these small lots, small bundles, we're being told that the ideal size is round about 1 to 8,000 premises in that bundle. That's a kind of sensible size to build out from. We know that particularly with these smaller bundles, and specifically as well, I think more in rural areas, there's an option to be innovative in terms of the technology that's used to deploy these solutions, and also in the implementation. And I think really for these smaller procurement areas, you are able, as the supply side of the market, to use more innovative techniques that are specifically suited to the small procurement area that you find yourself working in. We've also had lots of feedback, and I think this applies as much to the Type A procurements as the Type Bs, in that it makes sense to kind of build out from where there is already coverage or where there is kind of planned coverage. So I think it's important that we recognise that. And Ben's slide that kind of showed the graph of speed of implementation is very much dependent on utilising this methodology. So, and that's also feedback we've had from you, which is good. We also hear that a lot of the deployments in this kind of field are based around a community, and then from that community being able to reach out to further and potentially smaller rural communities as well. And we've had lots of feedback as well about vouchers, about the demand side of the equation, where vouchers may be a more appropriate way to go and a more flexible way to go for providers. And of course, we must, in designing this programme, be mindful that vouchers and hubs have a significant role to play as well. I'm not going to stay on this slide for very long, because essentially it's just indicative. And what I mean by that is it's indicative in terms of it's showing procurement areas which are round about the right size in terms of the kind of 1 to 8,000 that I was talking about. So they're just essentially located in areas where we know there isn't a proposal at the moment for a Type B procurement, or where there's no commercial build. So please don't read too much into that map. It is purely indicative. We're not saying that those small areas described are the right areas. We're just saying those small areas are around the right size, and they neither sit within commercial build plans or sit within procurement Type B, the large ones. And again, those locations have been chosen, as I said on the previous slide, really, so that it gives suppliers an opportunity to build out from areas where you've already got coverage, or where you're planning to go in the near future. So how are we going to kind of put these procurements together? We're really interested to get your views on this. So as I said, 1 to 8,000 is around about the right size for these Type A's. We want to focus on as many sub-superfast premises as we can, and we want a mix of premises which are kind of easier to get to and cheaper to serve, and those which may not be and may be more expensive. The procurement areas may kind of work out from communities, and also we've been looking at output areas as well. So does it make sense to use output areas to construct the boundaries? Fiber networks sometimes, but not always, are delivered kind of using roadsides as a kind of boundary as well. So these are also considerations we need to think about in designing these Type A procurements. But I think the overarching and most important thing to say is that we're very much dependent on the feedback that we get from both yourselves and from local bodies as to what these small DPS procurements actually look like. We're not going to be able to design hundreds and hundreds of these in isolation. It's very much a collaborative approach to designing them. It will be a combination of where you want to go, where you currently are, what your delivery capacity is. There'll also be, I'm sure, input from local authorities, local bodies, where they think there will be competition or where they don't think there will be competition, and also what their priorities are as well. So there are a wide range of considerations, but as we say, I think one of the main considerations is going to be kind of where are we at the moment in the kind of sort of national program, and how do we build out from that? And also, the consideration around vouchers. Are there areas where vouchers could offer a better solution? If that's the case, then we should be delivering with vouchers. And as Lara said, we do plan to continue delivering with vouchers. But for us, I think at the moment, the most important thing to say is we need feedback from you in order to design these Type A intervention areas. So we're really looking forward to getting your feedback on the 22nd to the consultation that's live at the moment. That's all I'm going to say at the moment on the small procurement areas. I'll hand over to Adam, I think, who's going to say a few words now about vouchers.
Yeah, hi everyone. Hope you're doing okay. My name's Adam Lowes. I'm one of the commercial leads in the voucher team. And yeah, like Ben and Laura and Raj said, I'll talk to you a bit more about vouchers this afternoon. So there's only one slide from me, so you haven't got to do too much Tony. So we'll just leave this up and I'll talk okay. through it. So yeah, a lot of you are using vouchers really well at the minute, and have been a key part of their success in delivering connections in rural areas over the last few years. And that success is one of the reasons why vouchers will continue to play a part under the UK Gigabit programme. Procurements will have a role to play, but there is a place at the table for the demand side measures such as vouchers. And like Laura said, we're considering more than £250 million of funding for vouchers from the 1.2 billion over the next few years to continue to deliver those incremental connections in the hardest to reach areas. So whilst we look to accelerate the start of the future schemes and get those procurements started in the spring, we're going to continue to work with you, other suppliers and local authorities to support communities and businesses with Gigabit voucher projects, because they are a really good mechanism at providing access to Gigabit capable broadband in the hardest to reach communities in the UK. And for me, it boils down to two questions. Are there rural fringes at the edge of your commercial rollouts? Could vouchers be used to extend your commercial rollout? Are there a couple of houses at the end of a dirt track? Can vouchers be used to just reach those final few premises which miss out? Or are there premises at the edge of ongoing contracts with BDUK? How can vouchers help fill in those gaps there? And I think when vouchers are always considered as part of extending your rollout, that is just another way of getting us to that at least 85% target ready for 2025. So looking ahead to the new scheme, which starts in April, because the current scheme ends in March, I can't give you specifics currently on what the new voucher scheme will look like, because we're still going through the final assurance stages. But what I can say is we have absolutely no appetite to stop fluid builds in March. So providing these in-flight projects meet the new eligibility criteria for the UK Gigabit programme voucher, then we will look to transition these with you. So once we're pretty confident on what that final eligibility criteria is going to be, all of the team and I will work with you to get those projects transferred over, so that from April you can start requesting vouchers under the UK Gigabit banner, and you don't lose all of the great work you've done building up this significant pipeline. But for those which aren't eligible, and it's a fairly small minority of the current eligible premises, then you will need to request those vouchers before March 31st. So when we come up to you over the next couple of weeks and tell you what the impact is on your portfolio, you'll know whether or not the projects are eligible to transfer or not. And if they're not, you will then need to request those vouchers by the end of March. And then once that voucher is requested and the customers said yes, they've signed up to take a service with you, or they've given their consent, you've then got 12 months to deliver that network. So once the voucher is issued, that's not impacted by the change in eligibility criteria. So anything which isn't eligible from April, providing that's requested and issued before March, you've still got 12 months to get that delivered. So there's still a good chunk of time to deliver those connections, even if they aren't eligible under the new scheme. And with the new scheme in mind, I think the learnings from the LFFN and RGC vouchers have been really significant in setting up kind of how the UK Gigabit voucher is going to work. So the learnings from the pilot and your constructive feedback of the last 6-12 months has made a real difference in how we see vouchers and the part they're going to play. We've made significant progress kind of with the user journey, which I think should help you all feel a bit more comfortable with using them. So picking up Catherine's point about risk, I think some of the changes we're looking at making will reduce the risk that suppliers take on. So we're looking at things like text message validation. So your beneficiaries will get a text to tell them to confirm their voucher, as well as an email. So that should hopefully improve the conversion rate, meaning you get paid for what you're owed. We've got we've got a new and improved comms team, so better customer collateral, so customers know exactly what's required of them before they take a voucher project out. And also looking at a UPRN level eligibility checker, so we can move away from the whole postcode versus UPRN ambiguity we have at the minute. So all of those things should give you a lot more confidence in the voucher product when you take on voucher projects. And it's worth saying they're only a snapshot. We've got a ton of optimizations we're looking to make before the new scheme goes live, and I'll share more as soon as I can. And I think again, it's just worth picking up the point which everybody made earlier. All of the interventions are going to complement each other. Vouchers, outside in, there's going to be no competition. They'll all complement each other. There won't be any double funding. And they're all going to work together to help achieve our goals. And I think Ben gave a really good answer on that earlier. That's why getting your pipelines into us is really important, because once you're confident in your plans, if you can share them with us, that just makes just improves the richness of our data, which improves the bundle and intervention design. And then the final point, I think Laura pointed as the entry level into BDUK's sort of products. And she's right. It does have the lowest barriers to entry because it is a demand side measure, but it's also you can also use fixed wireless technologies as well as FTTP. So where it isn't commercially viable to deploy FTTP, which I think Lloyd touched on earlier, providing it's gigabit capable, then we do accept fixed wireless and point-to-point wireless solutions to deliver in the final 5 or the final 1%. So we're definitely really keen to see wireless solutions too, and the T's and C's which maybe didn't create a level playing field, we're looking at how we can optimize those again to make sure wireless projects are treated as equally as fixed projects are. So hopefully that gave you a more detailed overview of where we're taking vouchers, and gave you confidence that, you know, your projects aren't going to fall off a cliff come the 31st of March. We are going to, you know, there's going to be a significant period of working together to transfer as much as we can over to continue that delivery. And, you know, all of the changes I've outlined, you know, are changes for good, and, you know, they'll be shared with you as soon as we can. But, you know, today's product is really successful in rural areas, and that set the baseline for how vouchers should work. So, you know, don't expect wholesale changes. It's more fine tuning. But, you know, if you are interested in vouchers and you're not using vouchers, you'll have my details from the agenda, I think, or just get in touch with somebody in BDUK, and I'm happy to go into more detail about vouchers, and look forward to some questions shortly.
Okay, thank you very much. So we've now got to have some opinions from some of the operators about the mix of vouchers and small bundles. We've got Ilan, yes, from Vonius, got Dave Cullen from ITS, and Michael Armitage. You should be there somewhere. There you are. From Broadway Partners. Michael, are you there?
I am indeed.
Oh, indeed. Thank you very much. Right. So as before, we'll take the order on my screen, which goes Ilan, David, and then Michael. So your views on the vouchers and on small bundles, please. Ilan, over to you.
Hi, everyone. So I think a lot of the things that I would comment on have actually already been mentioned through the conversations that have been happening over the last hour. But you know, at Veneas, we're generally very supportive of the voucher program. We're using it at the moment to submit various different PRPs, and we'll continue to do so in the new guise. And me and Adam caught up last week on a couple of initiatives that we've got going forward, and some requests in terms of how we want to see the program develop over time. I think the main thing that I would talk about with vouchers, in conjunction with what we've already spoken about in terms of the outside-in program, is trying to ensure that both programs work collectively together and holistically. And I think that's probably the biggest challenge that I can foresee with this whole ambition, which is obviously a great ambition, but it's understanding how you work through that fragmentation that exists in some of these larger procurement areas. And I think that, you know, what Adam's suggesting in terms of incentives and going that bit further in terms of where you are today in terms of your voucher requests and your PRPs, can you go a little bit further and can create more contiguous, larger bills, will reduce that fragmentation that exists in some of these larger procurement areas. So I think the greater incentivization BDUK can create to go further and go more beyond where you currently were envisaging going, I think is for the better for all of our organisations, because it reduces the fragmentation. In terms of the outside-in program and the lots and the size of the lots, I think we're very comfortable with. We like the size of somewhere between 1 and 8K, and we kind of want to get more engaged with that program as we see further detail in the next couple of months. So we see our strategy as both kind of taking the best of both in many ways, of vouchers and of the outside-in program, and drawing upon what we already have in the existing framework with many communities in very rural parts of the UK, is basically taking and leveraging our existing penetration in these very rural areas and using the best of either vouchers or the outside-in program to extend that coverage with the available funding.
David, you're up next.
I was going to come off mute and say you're still on mute, James. So yeah, thanks, James. Yeah, I think from an ITS perspective, we're very encouraged by how the entire program's coming together, and in particular where the focus seems to be around the small bundles and vouchers from a demand and supply side intervention perspective. It works together. I mean, particularly the four things that I think are being given a better emphasis this time around, you know, are the recognition of the importance of a community or a cluster approach to actually bring an opportunity together. The value, clearly, as Lance just said, we've said before, of recognising the genuine role of FWA, as Lloyd said, to, you know, in that mix, because that's absolutely inevitable in a lot of areas we see, and I can't see any way around it. We've just got to make sure it's the gigabit capability of the right FWA platforms is treated in the same way as an FTTP solution, however wide or smart that gets, but also mapping it against what might be used as GFAST still where that occurs. The other key thing is the opportunity of expansion of existing deployments, and that's where, from an ITS angle, that's the most encouraging thing for us, because with our focus on wholesale metro networks now, as well as the existing 15 to 25 rural business parks, rural communities we're serving, that ability to basically grow out and expand smartly is an important part. But that leads to one of the 2 or 3 points I think we're either not sure on, or we think could end up in concerns. The one is where the anchor tenancy comes from for some of that expansion overlay. And whilst in a deep rural area, it's a complete understandable given that the focus is on residential, but in a suburban and out model, business vouchers and the business aspect in terms of B2B market is as important. We see quite often the anchor tenancy coming still from our existing wholesale B2B market around the out of town business industrial estate, out of town business park, out of town retail park, which comes into the same mix. And I think if we're limiting the vouchers to a pure resi and not thinking about how we can leverage back the good work that was done on the previous DCMS business vouchers, we're missing a big trick. So I think we need to think carefully about that one. The other 2 areas, to my mind, are then how, I think you just touched on it, Adam, but how we would balance the use of vouchers with a type A infrastructure intervention from a supply side, because actually we in the market, and not ITS of course, but in the market, I'm sure there have been a lot of examples of where vouchers, because of the aggregation ability, have turned into a supply side intervention, quite understandably and quite rightly, because that's the only way you can do it in those areas. Equally, I think as we're going forwards, a mix of voucher and supply side intervention might be needed. Here, the issue and the risk of, you can't double subsidize, correct. But unless I'm mistaken, and all my work with DG Comp and Regio was wrong, then a demand side intervention doesn't count as a double subsidy in the same way if it's considered properly. And I think we need to be smart about that one as well. And the third component is that I'd like to introduce a new challenge phrase for us. We've got used to managing and being cautious about overbuild. I think the big message that the next phrase that might come out for the next 18, 24 months is overlay. Yeah. Because I've got to admit, I've been following all the seminars, I've been on all the sessions, I've had all the feedback. I still don't understand how we are going to manage between the 3 layers effectively when the rubber hits the road. End of.
Right. That's a very good place to stop. Thank you very much, David. We'll get back to bits of that. Michael, like you, and I know that you've been following the development process of the Outside In program all the way through. So, what are your views, particularly on vouchers and the small bundles at this stage?
Okay, thanks, James, and good afternoon, everybody. Great to have this opportunity to talk to you all. In fact, I'll just pick up on David's last comment when he very candidly, and I'm glad he said it, I don't have to say it, which is he still doesn't understand how it's all going to work together, and it made me think of the overlaying of multiple interventions and demand-led initiatives, and it made me think of, it was responding to one of Catherine's comments that certainty is absolutely key in the attraction of large suppliers to deliver scale benefits and so on. And I was thinking rather facetiously, but I think still validly, that that Openreach's certainty is all our collective uncertainty, and the more certain Openreach is, the greater scope there is for us to be paralysed by fear. And I don't want to make too much of a thing of it. That's Openreach's job, is to be market significant. But while we're trying to earn our crust in between and taking the crumbs off the table, if you like, I think we're all familiar with your experience where we're not quite sure where BT is going to go next, and what we thought was a clear path to a fibre deployment suddenly becomes a subject to change control or just a revision of plans. So certainty is a great thing, but not if it's sort of in the sort of exclusive preserve of one provider. So having started on a negative note, the positive note is, I mean, I've learned so much from this session today. So thanks, INCA, for organising this, and thanks, BDUK, and everybody for contributing. A great little bit of clarification on the new voucher scheme. Thanks very much, Adam. That was really appreciated. I have to say, as an operator which works pretty much exclusively in Scotland and Wales, I'm sort of still struggling to work out what's in it for us. We're patient because we've been doing this for quite a long time, but I'm really, really eager to find out how this is going to work with existing interventions in Scotland and Wales, because that's our bread and butter. A couple of points which haven't really been raised, but I mean, DTMS has been running, and BDUK has been running, or did run, the Broadband Upgrade Fund initiative, the pilot exercise across Cornwall and northern parts of England and southwest Wales, which we have an interest in. So it didn't do my Christmas plans any good, but then, you know, what Christmas plans did I have anyway? They weren't much. So, but the Broadband Upgrade Fund pilot came to a rip-roaring climax over Christmas and the New Year, with the deadline looming for all the communities that had registered their interest just a week ago, and it made for an extremely frenetically busy couple of weeks for us, which was great because, you know, very, very helpfully, and this, you know, one of the key lessons from that Broadband Upgrade Fund pilot exercise was how strong and self-organising potentially are communities in rural areas when given a bit of encouragement and prodded in the right direction. And I mean, we were pretty much overwhelmed by the response we get. An operator in counties that we hadn't operated in before, so we were completely unknown. Yeah, a very simple message to BDUK is never underestimate the capacity for communities to self-organise if they're given encouragement to do so. And I think that plays definitely to the voucher process. As we all know, voucher aggregation is about demand aggregation and finding points of contact within communities to make things happen. And in that regard, I'd also say it's not a concern, but it's an observation. If the communities are important in this game, then so are the local elected members and local councillors. So whether it's the local authority, whether it's the county level, or whether it's a community council, these people are absolutely crucial for getting things done at a local level. You know, we can't be an open reach and be everywhere all the time. So we have to work through good partnerships on the ground, and don't underestimate or disregard the input that can come from local authorities. I'm sure you're not, but equally also from community councils. I almost fell off my chair when I saw, I think like many people saw, expected number of suppliers for the outside in programme being 5 to 10. I know that point's been made before, but that surely was a misprint.
I suspect it wasn't. But you've saved me asking a question.
If we're talking large and very large, I can see the logic perhaps for having a single figure number of suppliers bidding, I guess. I mean, there just aren't numerically that number of suppliers, I guess, able to operate on a larger scale. But for the small lots, for the type A's, I mean, I'm sure, you know, virtually everybody in this room, virtually everybody in this virtual room would consider themselves well qualified for the outside in programme, and you know, we're talking scores, not 5 to 10. The final point I'd make is, and it's not really discussed because we're all thinking about you know, whether it's fixed wireless access or fibre to the premise, we're all thinking about the local access network as being the crucial element in the delivery of the 100% gigabit capable infrastructure by 2025, which I still think is doable, although I seem to be a lone voice. But it's also about backhaul, and you know, in rural areas, backhaul is the maker or breaker of the economics of any local deployment, whether it's fixed wireless access or fibre. I mean, I don't need to tell this assembled company that fact, but we don't discuss it, and you know, we know that the direction of backhaul circuits or any sort of circuits is upwards in terms of pricing. What we need is competition in the backhaul market. And that's not part of the discussion or the agenda, and I think it should be, because if gigabit capable connectivity is available within a couple of kilometres of any population cluster, then sure as heck, local initiative and effort and a few vouchers thrown in will make sure that gets translated into access networks as well. So let's not disregard the importance of backhaul. There is only one supplier in that market, and you know, we love taking circuits from OpenReach. We love taking capacity from OpenReach, but it is expensive, and it would be helpful to have a little bit of supplier diversity in the backhaul network as well as in the access network. So that's my thoughts.
Michael, thank you very much. Now I'm going to try and sort of go through some of the questions. I always find it slightly difficult doing my own, but never mind. Malcolm, if you want to join in, then feel free. Stephen Terry got a good one. Vouchers, will there be an aggregated and non-aggregated scheme? Adam, I'm afraid a lot of these questions are going to come straight to you because there's a lot of interest in the voucher scheme. We used to have the concept of the sort of the individual vouchers, and then that got sort of transferred almost into the sort of the concept of aggregation. Now certainly the scheme that's current seems to be aggregation only. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so there's there is a big focus, and I think rightly so, on larger contiguous areas because, like Ben said, it is full steam ahead. The bigger the better. Build wherever you can within reason. But I think aggregated vouchers, a project can be 2 or more premises, which, given the amount of premises in scope for vouchers, I don't think that is a difficult ask. So at the minute, we're not going to be offering single voucher projects. It's going to remain as 2 or more vouchers will constitute a voucher project.
Okay, I think we can. If you can accept 2 as being an aggregation, then I think you're absolutely right. We probably can just move on from that, can't we?
There's one here from Philip Lawrence. I think would be which is, if large procurement areas are there to help efficiency, scale, and pace, surely the same logic works for rural areas of smaller scale. How will BDUK help small altnets achieve this in the procurement of 8,000 size lots, rather than end up in a patchwork of networks? So that's from Philip of Airband. I'm not sure who the best person to answer that is.
That's probably either to Ben or Andy, I'm afraid. Ben's not looking hugely enthusiastic about that.
I can leave this one for Andy. Yeah, so, sorry. I think, if I understood the question correctly, Malcolm, I mean, basically, you're asking, are they individual intervention areas, or could they be grouped together? And definitely they can be grouped together. What we are looking at is the optimal way of doing that. So there's obviously options such as exchange areas. We're currently looking at MSOAs because they make more natural kind of boundaries following roads and pathways and junctions, and therefore we think that we can then avoid inadvertently missing out premises and creating hotspots. So that's the sort of line of approach that we're trying to take, is to ensure that we are formulating areas which are attractive to the market, and we will test that, of course, and then go through the formal processes of checking that. So the national RMR approach identifies the premises where we can go because there's no commercial build or planned. We will then try to turn those into areas which are sensible, make a reasonable intervention area, try test that with the market through some sort of engagement to assess interest, and then put them into the formal public review, which is a legal requirement, just a final test to make sure that we're not missing anything before they go into a procurement exercise.
It is an interesting point, though, the sort of the fundamental point behind what Philip's sort of asking, because I'll be clear. It's a bit awkward me being chair because it actually limits what I can say. I can't help thinking that someone did that deliberately, but never mind. I'm quite a strong fan of the idea of vouchers and small bundles and the large procurement areas, just not where you got them. To me, if you'd swapped around the areas you've chosen for small bundles and the areas you've chosen for large bundles, that would make so much more sense, because there is much more competition around the areas that you've looked at for large procurement areas, that would more naturally sit with that patchwork quilt, using potentially vouchers then to fill in the individual properties. That kind of works to me. Using a large procurement over all that area seems wrong. Sorry, you're going to have to excuse this. My dog is called Harmony, and she's the most ironically named pet. Imagine she's about to kick off in the background. So anyway, doesn't that issue though apply if you want to get more economies of scale, particularly in those rural areas at the moment they're occupied by the small bundles? Wouldn't going to large procurement areas there make more sense?
So I'll take that first and let Ben have a go afterwards. I mean, I think that's the consultation document gives you that opportunity, James, to make that very point, and others, of course, can do likewise. So the purpose of that exercise was to give you the opportunity to feed back, because I don't think there's any presumption in the consultation that those areas are set in stone.
Yeah, so I suppose the other thing I would say, and actually this is a conversation which we've had with some local bodies as well, is that this isn't, those areas are not areas that we've kind of designed to avoid or take in or anything. That they're just the areas from talking to the larger providers that they are saying they can build most rapidly. But I accept your points that actually that may be an area where lots of smaller providers can also provide stuff. So that's where we want to see, as Andy says, in the consultation response, if there are bits we need to carve out. But if we drew the areas in, what was left, I suppose we have to ask how confident we are that we would get the larger providers bidding for those lots. And what we want to avoid is coming up with our sort of ideally we'd like you City Fibre or whatever to build here, but actually they've told us they're not interested in building there. They've got commercial plans they're pretty busy with, and they've told us that actually if we award this bid on the outside, that they can keep their workforce busy at scale and build out a bit further. So it's not perfect, but it's really important, I think, that we make informed decisions. And in a way, I think our objectives are all aligned. We do genuinely want everybody to be as busy as possible. We all need to be busy. We don't want to, come in with big procurements with the really large operators and stomp all over everyone's work. That's absolutely not what we're about. Equally, we do have to give them quite a lot to run at. So we need to try and carve out as quickly as possible the areas we want to protect, and then be clear and transparent so that we all understand who's going where.
That sort of neatly segues into anonymous attendee who's been asking lots of questions. At what stage will the target intervention area be locked down? It's important for smaller operators to know that the intervention area is fixed before they expend their resources. That's a fairly obvious process question, but it's probably worthy of asking that. I'm not sure, again, who's best to answer that.
I'll have a go at that, Malcolm. So I think the point at which it effectively becomes locked down is at the public review. Yeah. And certainly the tail end of that, but probably as we enter to that effectively comes to, there will be, possibly the public review will make some suggestions that iterate that slightly, but we would anticipate at that stage it becomes a fixed point and then it enters into procurement.
Okay. We've got the question from Ian Corden. Last time we surveyed, many rural businesses, most of which are SMEs and consumers, were unsure whether gigabit speeds were really needed. What was 100% clear is the need for something better than the slow, long-lived copper. I suppose basically we're saying, is gigabit really necessary at this point? Now I say that I've been looking at some fixed wireless access delivery up in the northeast, and when you're using fixed wireless access, actually gigabit is really, really challenging to be able to really put hand on heart and say, yeah, that's going to be deliver gigabit. But 100 megabit per second, which would be a massive jump forward for a lot of users, is relatively easy. Who wants to have a go at that one?
Can I take that one?
Laura, yes, ideal. Thank you.
in lieu of Raj being on the call for the moment. So there's probably a couple of things to say. The first one is that the procurements are technology agnostic, although they do all require the same output-based specification to be met, so the gigabit capable. So if fixed wireless suppliers, satellite, any other type of technology can meet the requirements, they will be evaluated on a like-for-like basis as much as possible. The other point to make is that we have excluded the F1, so those final 1% of the really hard to reach, exponentially expensive premises, they are excluded from the £5 billion of funding. There is a separate business case which is looking at how to address those premises and when, and with what solution. So that's a really important point to note. So I think in terms of, is the demand there? For those of you who read the FTIR, which I know is quite a lengthy document, that does actually point out that this is providing the supply ahead of demand. Because if we wait for everybody to suddenly demand the faster speeds, the lead time to then build out into those rural areas will be a significant delay in terms of getting what consumers are demanding. So we know that we are providing the supply ahead of demand, probably just in the initial years, I should imagine. I think COVID has really made us all realise how much we do need good connections at home and other places. So I think if that, hopefully that answers the question, James. Let me know if I haven't actually.
It does. That is very promising. I mean, you're right. My calculations based on Ofcom data suggest that by 2024, then the existing sort of 30 meg superfast will start to be looking really quite inadequate for a lot of people. So something better than that, and a lot of people, of course, are already on something not as good as that. So, but by around 2027, actually, gigabit is going to be the point. If we carry on at this sort of 35-36% compound annual growth that we've had for quite a long time, gigabit's sensible. But exactly as obviously you realise, the idea is just saying, well, okay, we can't deliver you gigabit, so we're going to give you nothing. Seems a little bit harsh. So if we can have something that plugs that gap, that's very encouraging. Thank you very much. Interested to work out how we're going to do it, but I guess we all are. Any more questions? Anything?
There's another one here, which is I'm not sure it's been quite answered, but it's again from anonymous attendee. Would vouchers become invalid in areas which get awarded a very large outside-in contracts? One of the large ones, or presumably one of the super ones, I'm not quite sure what they're called. At what stage would this happen? I don't think that's the case, but I'm not at all sure. So the interplay between the BDUK interventions and vouchers, how does that work?
I'll have a crack at that again, Malcolm. So it's a similar answer to the previous one, which is it's likely that there will be a hold on vouchers in an area at the public review stage. And obviously we have to understand what's going on and what's committed to in terms of vouchers when we make that choice and decision. But the idea is obviously once you have committed to a supply side intervention, then there should in theory be no need for the vouchers. However, of course, you need to understand what the outcome of that supply side was and what when a point might come at a later stage when vouchers would again be relevant. So the idea is once you have a fixed supply side activity, which assumes that it does most of the premises, then it would be at the public review that the vouchers would cease to be made available in that area. However, if it was clear that not 100% was going to be achieved, and there was a thought that vouchers could close that final gap, then that would be something that we should be considering.
Oh, I think there'll be a lot of interest in how that could work, because that's both a restriction from the supply side issue in terms of how to sort of bid for projects. That long tail of very hard to reach properties is a serious problem to people, but also obviously an opportunity from the other side. So I think there'll be a lot of interest as you develop that, how that's going to work. Very keen.
Could I just add very, very quickly? I mean, I think the point at which we public review will be just before we do the procurement. So we're not going to be doing all of it now. If we've decided to defer an area for a year, we'll do the public review in a year. And particularly on the very large procurements, it's certainly not the intention to do a public review for 500,000 premises in the north of England and then lock all of that lot down. That'll be something where we'll draw down as we need to, and we'll public review before we do the drawdown. So it's not that we're doing all of this, by summer this year and then it's all locked down for the next 5 years. It's going to be a staged process, and as we run each procurement, we'll do the public review just before the procurement and then take a view based on that.
Okay. Can I just ask a sort of apologies if this appears to be a completely naive and stupid question, but if you were designing a project seeking to bid for funds, which included areas that were suitable for the BDUK intervention, but also would be suitable for vouchers, i.e., properties which are a bit far away and therefore difficult to reach under the intervention scheme. I mean, couldn't that be put together in a sensible project?
Yeah, we just need to be clear to everyone what they're doing. So what we don't want to do is to if we've said this area is now part of a supply side intervention and this provider is looking after it, they may be planning a deployment out to some premises within that intervention area, which another provider is looking at potentially building with vouchers. We wouldn't want those two to interact in an uncoordinated way. So yes, if we agreed that we take some of those out of scope of this supply side intervention, because actually it's better delivered as a voucher funded intervention, that's fine, but it needs to be by agreement. So we can't have ambiguity about this might be supply side, it might be demand side. We'll wait and see, because we risk there wasting money, frankly, and effort.
Okay, got one question. Okay, how will BDUK defend against a large operator announcing commercial properties to reduce the IA? I'm not quite sure what IA means there, but never mind. And delay or derail contracts. Let's be honest, I think we can accept that doesn't necessarily just apply to large operators. There are one or two others who might take a similar approach of saying, oh yeah, we're going to go there. What is the approach you're going to take to really identify the validity of commercial build plans in terms of that public consultation? Again, mass enthusiasm to answer. Ben, I'm looking at you, so go on.
To be honest, I'm not familiar with the detail of how the public review work is done, other than we do qualify whether we believe plans, and it is difficult because if you've got a large supplier and their credible plans, then to some extent you have to go with what they're saying. And the reality is plans do change for whatever reason. Plans do change. It becomes apparent that there's a better target over here. So it's always a really difficult interaction with any state aid work, because for government to interfere in the market is not a desperately comfortable place. We absolutely can't constrain, nor do we want to constrain free market operation. We want to, the other side of what DCMS is doing is trying to sort of stimulate normal market operation and remove barriers and things like that. But it is a free market. We can't control it. So what we're trying to do with the OMR PR process is crystal ball gaze and take a measured view about what we think is going to happen. I think this is, you know, I mentioned earlier about having prospects as well as committed build, and it may be that what we end up doing in some cases is saying, well, look, actually at the moment we think there's a possibility this is going to happen. It's not necessarily a certainty, but it might be prudent to defer some areas to wait and see what happens. And that's, but it's going to be a judgment call. It's going to be difficult. It's, you know, and we're not going to get it right every time. We're going to try that.
I think the honest answer on that one is that we all kind of recognise that it is probably the most difficult part of the whole thing. The one that certainly I would be least inclined to participate in from your side, but that still isn't going to stop people moaning about it when things go wrong. There's nothing we can do about that.
I've got something I'd like to comment on, which is Campbell Cameron's made a point about your point, James, about wireless, etc. Everybody would like a Ferrari in the driveway. Most folk drive an Astra, and many are fed up walking, so Dacia would do. Thank you very much. Well, currently I'm in Moldova, which is where my wife's family live, and that's right next to Romania, where Dacias are made. And the village has had fibre to the premises installed fairly recently. So my in-laws bought the 100 meg symmetric connection to what we're on at the moment. So we even get, it's not quite a Ferrari, but it's pretty good in a little village in Moldova, next to Dacia land. Just thought I'd say that.
It was quite amusing that your sound went all fuzzy as you were going through that, but I suspect that was more to do with the processor in your computer than it was to do with your fibre broadband. Have any members of the panel, our long-suffering panel who've been sort of sitting here trying to sort of hold their tongues, any more comments, questions that they want to ask since that you've made the effort of participating? No.
Can I just get, James? Can you hear me? Can I just get clarification to this issue, which is sort of strange to me? Is the thinking that if somebody has already built a fibre network using vouchers, because it's demand-led intervention, if you like, that has risk within state aid rules of being overbuilt by supply-led intervention? Have I got that right or the wrong way around?
That is completely wrong, because you said built. Once it's there, once it's built, there is absolutely no need to overbuild it.
Yeah.
If you've just planned it, then certainly under the current scheme, that is much more vulnerable. And we've seen issues of problems happening in Wales. And that's one of the things that I think we need to try and address as we go into the next sort of scheme. All of these things are, shall we say, a bit of an iteration. As problems arise, you think, oh yeah, hadn't seen that one coming, better do something about it. That's just the way it is.
Good. So for that.
Adam, I hope I've got that completely right, haven't I?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, if there's gigabit capable network in the ground, there's no need for any intervention, any more intervention, whether that's demand or supply side.
Yeah. One of the things that, Ben, I think it was you said, though I'm not absolutely certain about that, about vouchers not being a genuine commitment because you haven't necessarily got those. I think there might need to be a way that we address that so that operators said, okay, here's my PRP. We're going to pass these premises. We're expecting to use a certain amount of voucher funding, but we'll take that risk. We as an operator are now going to commit to deliver this area and take the risk of whether we can get the vouchers or not. I think if operators are prepared to work on that basis, I would say that would be a strong saying, yeah, basically put it in the OMR, call it done. Obviously monitor it, but maybe that's just a simple way of doing it. One of my kind of enthusiasms is to see if we can find ways of solving these problems, but make it as simple as we possibly can so everyone knows what we're doing. Any more questions coming through? No, I don't think so.
Can I raise another point, James? I don't want to hog, but I'm sure you're looking for contributions. So So I'm intrigued with the argument that says that Openreach can justify, its support for the very large schemes because it needs to keep its workforce fully employed and gained and all that. But we all know that they work through subcontractors principally, and that it's the same kind of subcontractors that everybody else uses or has access to. So isn't it just a displacement issue that if somebody else comes along and employs the same subcontractors to do a piece of work and it's not Openreach, then there's no net loss to anybody other than perhaps to BT. So is the argument for scale at that sort of level of scale, it strikes me as arguable, if I may say. What do you think, James? What does the panel think?
I was hoping you weren't specifically going to ask me what I think. I think that's
I
think that's a very interesting and well supported argument, Michael.
Okay.
Shall I try and come in with
please.
something?
Yes,
please do. Thank you. Thanks, Lara. Thank you.
So, mini kind of history recap. We started with just the DPS, and I mean, essentially at that point, we didn't really have a good understanding of the data and the coverage and market activity. We just had to come up with, I like to call it the everyman solution. So the thing that anybody could bid for was ultimately flexible, and we could essentially build contracts bundle by bundle. As we've engaged more with the market, we've understood what the different size suppliers are looking for in terms of commitment and size and continuity, et cetera, et cetera. And that's why we've come up with the 3 different routes to market. But the key driver really for all of that has been the data. So if we're looking at a map of the country and there's an area which, there's no real footprint from anybody except for kind of legacy kind of copper network. We don't think any supplier really has any plans at this stage to go there. Through the consultation process, we will ask for more solid information about that. And actually, if the answer is, do you know what, everybody can build in all of these areas at the same time with small and medium and large contracts, then maybe the need for an incredibly large contract is less strong. But actually, if there are areas where we don't think we're going to get them covered within the right time frame, we need to come up with a solution for that takes advantage of every supplier that's in our marketplace. So really, if we were able to wait, for every supplier to systematically build around the country and cover all of the F20 areas, then great. We could do it in probably a better, maybe a slightly more open to everybody way of doing it. But because we don't have that luxury of time, we've got to get everybody building, as Ben says, as quickly as possible. We need to position the contracts and position suppliers in a way that's going to maximize coverage as quickly as possible. So it really is. Ben said this earlier, we're not going to keep everybody happy. You can't do that. Anybody who's worked in public sector knows that you can never make everybody happy. But what we need to do is work with what we've got and maximize coverage in every way that we possibly can, but still try and maintain levels of competition where it exists.
The time pressure has been relaxed, hasn't it? The time pressure has to some extent been relaxed by the withdrawal of the absolute 100% 2025 deadline.
No, so it sounds like it has, but if you look at that, one of the things that's doing is actually putting the pressure on the commercial build, because we're saying that it's trying to bring forward all of that commercial build, which I think is incredibly sensible, because obviously the more commercial build you've got, the more base you've got to build out from the public sector. So it's a very, very sort of useful idea, but the pressure really is on in terms of trying to, what can we do to drive that commercial build as fast as possible. I mean, of course, back to what Lara was saying, one way of encouraging commercial build in an area is to say, we're not going there. Help yourselves. That's all commercial area. There will be no procurement there. There's nothing to wait for. On you go. But obviously, I realise it's kind of not as simple as that, because you've got to put a boundary on it somewhere. But it's kind of nice to be able to suggest that things could be simple, isn't it? Raj, welcome back. Is there anything sort of further that you will want to sort of add to this now that we're sort of starting to sort of wrap things up? It has been very interesting to hear from the team.
Well, I mean, actually, I'd just like to follow on Michael's last point first, and then maybe say a few more words. But I think, as Lara pointed out, and as Ben said, and the team said, we've not 100% carved up the country and said this is what's going to happen. We put something forward, and we're really looking for a wider range of operators to contribute so that we can understand what build is going to be out there, and then start drawing some more informed maps and start thinking about how we deliver there. If there are some very large frameworks, very large areas that arise as a result of that, and if I was OpenReach, for instance, I might well turn around and say, I do want certainty, and that's the conversations that we are having with OpenReach. And the certainty in terms of labour force, instead of DL, I mean, they got their direct labour as well as subbies as well. So, what we're asking them to do is, as well as delivering the 80%, which is, absolutely what we want the market to do, is to deliver incremental build on top of that. So it might well be that OpenReach will go and increase their direct labour force in order to deliver that incremental build in a particular area. So, if it's displaced, then we're not getting any incremental build, are we? So somewhere down the line, we're asking somebody to do some more, then I suppose they would turn around and say, well, I need some certainty, because if you want me to do even more than I'm currently doing, then I need to potentially go out and recruit some people. So that was the first point. And I think, it's something that's definitely come out in the market engagement that we've been covering off over the past 12 months or so, as Lara said. But I mean, just kind of reflecting back on the session, I was at the beginning and kind of dipped in and out and was listening in. But I mean, I hope it's been really informative, and I hope all of your members understand a lot more about vouchers. I think it looks like that's been a really hot topic by looking at the Q&A anyway, but also understand a lot more about outside in, because I genuinely think that Type A is something that your members, as well as vouchers, will be interested in, probably more so than Type B, probably not Type C. And I'm encouraged actually that the feedback that I have heard on occasion has been that we have engaged more. I think Lloyd said that the engagement with BDUK has been so much better this time around than he's seen before, and that's testament to the team and what the team have done. So we've tried very hard to engage with the market as much as possible, so that we come up with a solution that isn't perfect. I don't know if it's going to be perfectly imperfect or not, but it's going to be something that we're going to need to work with all of industry on. And I think what I would say also is that I think there are some quote unquote rules of engagement that I think we need to ensure as well. So, and we're thinking along the lines of some kind of code of conduct or charter or something. So if you do engage in the outside in program, then you need to engage in a fair and transparent way, so that people don't say, we're going to go and build to all of this area, and then we carve it out and they don't go and build to all of that area. There has to be some consequences to statements made, because there are real consequences if that happens, because ultimately we all want to deliver connectivity to consumers and businesses, and as you've all quite rightly pointed out, and sorry, Malcolm, the pressure isn't off. We actually want to go still as fast as we possibly can do. It's a minimum 85%, but if we can do 95% by 2025, then absolutely that's what we would kind of aim to do. So hopefully your members have got a lot more information. They've got some contacts, obviously, because they now know who more of the team are, and we're really happy to kind of follow up and make sure that we get to the best result possible in terms of maximizing competition and driving value for money, which is fundamentals for us in terms of delivering this program.
Yeah, I think in terms of on the whole, in terms of the INCA members, the government's putting in £5 billion of funding, And what's been very clear right from the start is that this program is much more accessible to INCA members than previous schemes has been. And so I suppose when that much money comes in and is made accessible to as many people as possible, yeah, there are going to be a few cases where people get disappointed that they don't get an area that they wanted, but on the whole, there are more opportunities than there are threats from this. And I think that's something that we all have to sort of remember and be encouraged by. Malcolm, have you got anything sort of further you want to add?
Not a great deal. I just want to say thank you very much to Raj and the team for participating, and of course thanks to all of the other speakers, and of course James as well for chairing the session as well as James always does chair. The session is great. Thank you very much. Just one quick thing. Certainly, Raj, we'd be very interested in engaging with you on that whole question of transparency of planning, etc., etc. And I know that that's very dear to heart of Alex Blowers, who I think many people on this call will know has just been appointed as INCA's new chair. So Alex obviously is pretty well known in the sector and has made that point on a number of occasions. I'd like also to thank our sponsors, Hellman, Titan and Gabacom. But just wanted to say thank you very much to everybody and look forward to seeing people on the next of the INCA seminars.